Good evening, everyone. We're going to get started right now. I'm Sarah Cocaro, Conservation Resource Manager for the Town of Greenwich Conservation Commission. And on behalf of myself and my colleague, Ali Giorsi, the founder of the Food Shed Network, we welcome you to our fourth forum, Seasonality, a celebration of taste, place, and connection. After a summer hiatus, Ali and I are grateful to be reconvening the Greenwich Food System Forum with our fall series. We extend a warm welcome to each of our panelists for generously donating their time, and we thank our community partners for their promotional support. A special thanks to Jess Reed from In Greenwich, who is navigating the tech behind the scenes tonight. A few housekeeping items. The program will be 90 minutes with about 20 minutes at the end for questions. Please put your questions in the Q&A located at the bottom of your screen. This webinar is being recorded and it will be posted to the Food Shed Network website. Ali and I like to begin our forums recognizing that we are part of a continuum of caring for and stewarding our lands and watersheds. This stewardship has been happening for many thousands of years by Indigenous people and continues today. We are grateful to have Dawn Spears here tonight, who is Narragansett. Dawn's husband, Cassius, joined us as a panel speaker in April. We will learn tonight through a food system lens a little bit more about how to sustain our land and waters, the plants and animals that live within these ecosystems, and the people that work in these areas, not just for ourselves, but for future generations. We offer to our community a convening space where we can explore the more granular and broader conversations around food systems. This is our fourth panel, and what a journey it has been on so far with the Greenwich Food System Forum. Our spring series set the context for the industrialized food system. We heard from speakers who shared their cultural connection to food and how the knowledge of who they are as a people is ingrained in the seeds they sow. We looked into the ways in which the industrial food system has been the driver of some of our biggest social and ecological challenges. In May and June, we got more granular. We engaged farmers, aquaculturists, and food entrepreneurs about what it's like to produce food on Connecticut land and in Connecticut waters, and what their needs are to thrive in order to feed their community. We heard about shared barriers, such as dismantling racism, including the policies that perpetuate inequality and injustice. We heard from all of our speakers about the needs to access capital and affordable lands and waters, as well as their needs such as regional infrastructure, reliable consumer base, and having a robust network. After reflecting on our spring series, Ali and I slightly changed the format of our forum. Ali will engage the panelists in a more casual discussion rather than presentations. And with that, I will pass it over to Ali, who will lead tonight's discussion. Ali?
Thank you, Sarah. Good evening, everyone. Get over to my notes here. Happy equinox, although not by design, an appropriate week for this conversation as we head into the harvest time. So before we begin this evening's discussion, I want to offer a few contextual comments that are big and heavy and might not feel in alignment with our topic, but the underbelly of our food system needs to be brought forth and named in order for it to change. And Sarah and I are committed to doing that as honestly as we can. So I'm going to start off with a quote by Jennifer Molidor, senior food campaigner at the Center for Biological Diversity, as it goes to the heart of what the industrial food system produces. And I quote, "Food justice and environmental justice are intertwined. Society is shaped and sculpted by food culture and nutritional security, and often the exploitation that rips into the earth and wastes precious resources is driven by the same forces that poison our land with pesticides and spread inequity and injustice in their wake." And to take that sentiment a notch further, Raj Patel, a journalist, filmmaker, and academic, captures the industrial food system in 6 C's, or with 6 C's: climate, COVID, capitalism, conflict, chemicals, and colonialism. So essentially, the industrial system is designed to divorce us from our food source, from the seasonality of food, from growers and producers, from the artisanship and life-preserving practices, such as sharing land and waterways, seed saving, milling grain, processing livestock and seafood, growing and cooking, on, throughout the food system, and there is a through line of paradox. A few examples: over 1 billion people are food insecure. Most of them are farmers, farm workers, and food workers who live in rural communities. We overproduce food. I think we produce 1.5 times more food than is consumed. And a large portion of that goes to feedstock or is lost or wasted along the supply chain. Coastal communities, Greenwich being one of them, do not have easy access to food because it often traverses the globe before getting to plate, or we lack the policy and infrastructure that allows access. And one of the most significant, and again, I quote Thea Walmsley from a Growing Cultures newsletter offshoot, the modern food system is one of the largest achievements in terms of scale humanity has ever seen, and at the same time, continuing to pursue it is arguably the biggest threat to our shared health and survival. So I know this is an intense place to start, given the lighthearted nature of our title, and I think it helps us appreciate our panelists' commitments all the more, as it is this unjust system that drives their work. We will hear from leaders who do their best, as it is not easy, as you will learn, to defy in their own powerful ways this system. And in so doing, they center their values. Through different modalities, they express their commitment to justice, culture, integrity, relationship, to the taste and flavor of a place. And this evening's topic holds a special place in my heart and psyche as a former chef, fortunate to have had the privilege to immerse myself in the food and farming culture in the Bay Area, Marin County in particular. And that immersion influenced me tremendously as I now see sustainability through a food systems lens. I personally long for a shared community connection to the natural rhythms and cycles of our bioregion and the food cycle that comes with it, as well as a better understanding of each other, ourselves, and our shared sense of place. So tonight we are here to highlight the cultures and artisanship that are still intact and celebrated and honored. So thank you for being here. I hope you sit back and relax, and let's get started. So I think we're going to go into gallery view. Will I see that, Jess? Oh, there we are. Hi, Natalie.
Right now it's just Natalie, is that correct?
Let's all come together.
Sure thing. If everybody wants to turn their video on,
That'd be great.
We can have everybody in gallery mode.
Great. So I'm going to start off with Natalie. And so what we thought we'd do is share, as Sarah alluded to, is we're going to have more of a conversation where I will ask each of you questions and then feel free to go ahead and answer. And so I'm going to ask the one question to each of you, starting, as I said, starting with Natalie. So please introduce yourself and share your role as a bridge builder between food, place, and connection.
Well, hello, everyone. I am Natalie Love Cruz, and I am a culinary educator, writer, and leadership co-chair of NAFSN, which is the North American Food Systems Network. I connect food and folks through culinary instruction, starting with children. I think starting children off in the kitchen and exposing them to as much different food as possible is very, very important, especially when we're talking about seasonality and showing them what grows in their local areas. and all the way up to adults, and I do adult instruction as well. I write about food, society, and identity via my newsletter, which is Food for Thought, on the Substack platform. And I help lead NAFSN, which is a professional association for people working together to strengthen local and regional food systems. So in the heart of that work, it's basically kind of giving folks the tools to help in any way possible shape their careers in food systems, and try to get as many people who are interested in food systems pumped about it, and also folks who are already in it, seeing what ways we can expand, food systems as a whole.
Great. And NAFSN is North American Food System Network.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Wasn't sure if that was mentioned. Okay, David, kindly introduce yourself and share in what ways you are a bridge builder between food, place, and connection. Oh, and you're muted.
There we go. My name is David Standard. I'm the executive chef of Shipwright's Daughter in Mystic, Connecticut. I've been a chef for about 20 years. I was in New York most recently for quite some time doing many fine dining things. And then I felt like in New York City, there wasn't very much of a connection to where food came from. Even though you've kind of got the farmer's market, it's not really, nothing comes from New York City, really. So I wanted to be someplace where I could just have a deeper connection to where the food actually comes from. So I was lucky enough to end up here in Mystic, where obviously there's a ton of farms and there's other types of producers, but we also have an active commercial fishing fleet, and a kelp farm of our own, and some really cool stuff happening. So my initial steps when I got here was to just try to build relationships with the people who are making and going out and getting our food, and try to figure out how I could help, really. It's kind of, we have a high-end restaurant. It's not very well connected to doing social good necessarily. But for me, I wanted to try to build synergistic relationships in the community where I wasn't just somebody who was putting out money to get products to sell to somebody else, but I was trying to find ways to have those relationships work for everybody and to grow a stronger community, whether it's for the small fisherman who is trying to figure out how to make this a viable profession in the current climate, or for farmers who are trying to survive. And so we've been pretty successful with that, and that's kind of one of our governing principles.
Great. We'll dive into that a little bit more. Matthew.
Yeah, so my name is Matthew Rose. I'm a professional cheesemonger. I at two small retail shops here in Connecticut, one in Fairfield and one in Greenwich, which we stock with all of the great foods that we absolutely love. Like I said, it's one of the advantages of being a private-owned shop, that we can carry what we like. And our mission is really carry food that is completely tied to the land and to where it comes from. We have, at least 50% domestic cheeses and other small batch goods. And said our main focus is really to promote good American-made, agricultural products that we and to have a place that we can connect that to the consumers that can collect the money and send that complete that full chain back to those rural communities. And like I said, we do that on a daily basis, and we use our education of talking with a very personal kind of service-oriented format in our shops, and we are trying to get people to make better food choices, one person at a time as they come into the shop. So like I said, our focus is really on leveraging cheese for those communities, and using those areas that are also good stewards of the land and how they express that through cheese making. But also, it expands into other small quality goods too, like preserves and dried meats and fermented products too. And like I said, it's an ongoing idea of education that a lot of people, have a lot to learn, we feel like, and we feel like by giving them a better idea of what goes into these foods, that we can make better choices and tries to spend a little bit more on our food and our food system, and it connects us all a little bit more. So, yeah.
Great, thank you. And Don Spears. I think, Dawn, you're going to share some slides at this stage, right?
Yes,
Great.
and hopefully it will work now.
So,
Hello everyone. Trying to do the tech side and talk sometimes is a little bit of a challenge here. Here we go. Winikizik, Nitampawag, Natazawis, Katampanisha. Hello, everyone. My name is Dawn Spears, and I am joining from the homelands of the Narragansett Nation, one that I am a member of. I feel like I'm going to talk about who I am and how I'm a connector. The first thing I'm going to show is that I have a farm, and I've kind of moved to get to this place where now I'm a farmer. I can't believe I'm a farmer because first of all, I would always say that I'm a grandmother, I'm a mother, obviously I'm a wife, and somehow in there came an artist, and I don't know how I got to be a farmer, except that through the work that I've been doing, I've been working, this is some of my dolls, working in my community regionally as basically as an educator over the years, which led me to the work of food sovereignty with my husband. And then from food sovereignty, we formed Narragansett Food Sovereignty. We did a lot of work connecting a lot of, I'll say we hosted a food summit in 2018. We've made some huge inroads, I'll say, because we've been connecting people that are working on the ground with a lot of the leaders that are out there and a lot of the agencies that are not typically, I don't know, there's not usually a good connection between the two. And then I also run the Northeast Indigenous Arts Alliance, which has come from the arts administration side of my work. And basically you can see I'm all over the place. I'm an artist. I use the work that I am doing to help influence my art. And I take every opportunity to share our culture. Because for me and the work I'm doing, I feel like culture is very key, is really the basis of the work we're doing in agriculture. And so these are just quick examples of how, growing corn, and then it now inspires the work that I'm doing. Three sisters, as you just saw the picture. I also have done artwork. And then as a farmer, I grew strawberries, and strawberries have just always been very significant in our culture. So I have lots of work that really touches on that. And this very quickly shows kind of our handles and our logos. And then this is a quick example of my artwork. It's a lot. There was a lot to throw out there in a couple seconds.
beautiful. Yeah, that was just beautiful. Thank you for that. It really actually is perfect because it really, as you said, it kind of grounds us in the beauty of produce and food and art. And all of you are artists in your own way. And chef, writer, farmer, a celebrant and enthusiast of artisanal work through cheese. And I want to, the through line this evening is really connectivity, right? Connectivity to place through food, and how each of you really brings that forth, and in your own form and your own expression. And so essentially we're really talking about culture. And it's intimate, it's sacred, and it is a very deep part of who we are. And so, before we explore that a little bit, I want to kind of start broad and talk about the industrial food system and how that drives a wedge into regional food systems and disconnects community from their food source. So again, if we could just all go around and talk about, in your experience through your work or through personally, what barriers do you experience and see in your effort to support a local and regional food system? Shall we start with Natalie again?
Sure. I think from my point of view, coming from, I'm the only one who's here in New York City, it's very hard, kind of like how David said, he was a chef in New York City, to make that connection of where your food comes from. And in the work that I've done in the different communities that I've worked with, there is such a disconnect in what fresh food even looks like. I think there is so much that can be done for so many underserved communities, specifically of color. Mostly that's what usually happens, is people who are underserved are usually underserved as well in their communities with food. I've worked in neighborhoods that they had maybe one supermarket for maybe like 2 or 3 square miles. And that's insane for me to say for like something that's so metropolitan as New York City. But there are so many areas, and not specifically just in New York City, but in so many high traffic cities and even in rural areas as well, that there's just this disconnect between the food systems that our food comes through, and when it comes to the actual plate, in someone's home. And in my work, I try to make that connection, even if we don't see it, with our eyes. I try to make that connection just by showing folks, with different ingredients of like, okay, these apples are grown upstate. This is what we're going to be making our apple pie with. And avocados do not come from New York City, and things like that, where people have to kind of break that barrier of the supermarket, so to speak, of what you see every day in your supermarket is not exactly what comes from your local food system or even your regional food system. And I think the hardest thing to crack in in the industrial food system is really kind of creating those opportunities for dialogue, creating like these kinds of spaces where we're all talking about this and making people more aware of what's happening, especially in the communities that need it, the communities that actually need these kinds of conversations to be fostered. But yeah, in my work, I tried my hardest to just educate as much as possible. I work in high level areas of poverty. And so when I do my work and with the folks that I do it with, I try my hardest to come from a place of compassion and not from judgment, because not everyone has the same socioeconomic education and background and understanding of what a food system is. And so I just try to show it just through food and through instruction and seeing, just trying to get in there through that medium.
Right, which is often the best way, right? Is through the senses.
Yeah.
As Alice Waters would advocate for. Matthew, do you want to?
Yeah, I'd be happy
A
to.
little bit?
Yeah, so the industrialized food system really affects us in a lot of different ways here in the cheese industry. A lot of giving people a lot of maybe not quite the most accurate of how much food costs to produce. A lot of people, when they think of cheese, they think of something like a luxury product that is something mainly for special occasions, and something that, oh, well, I can't afford that. I can't go to the fancy cheese store in that. And that is and that is a problem when, why is your food so, people wonder why cheese is so expensive, when you should really be thinking about why is our other food so inexpensive and so cheap. And there is, on almost every level of our industry, there is a fairly major disruption as far as the mega food system, as far as, the distributors that we work with, that trying to get small batch products from rural areas and bring them to areas where people have the disposable income to be able to afford that. So there's not a lot of small, small distributors that are working the logistics to get it to a lot of places. We are in a really fortunate area here where a lot of it, if it's imported, comes in through New York, or, we get a lot of small batch food from Vermont, which, just has to take a ride down the road. But if you leave this region, go down into the southeast or out into the southwest, distribution becomes a major problem of who is actually moving these foods and where they are coming from, where you can see these areas where, if you don't have any diversity of food store you are, like kind of where Natalie hinted at, not that it's a regional issue, but if there's only one food store for every few miles, they are going to stock it with the foods that are probably the most non-perishable and probably the easiest for people to afford, the ones that they're going to buy time and time again. Which again is kind of a very strange idea for me once you start getting into like naturally how foods should work and allocated throughout these. And and a lot of how we function as a small store is most of the advantages are designed around larger stores, large chain stores. They get they can buy things cheaper. They can make more profits on what they have. And what you give up is really interesting products and really wholesome, good foods, which are the ones that we are trying to supply. So, where do you kind of meet in the middle of having foods that are accessible but also really enriching to your life that people can actually afford to employ in their daily routines and that. So like I said, that's just a couple ways where it affects us. There's not a lot of, as a small food store, there's not a lot of options for us as far as, the wages that we can pay people and also the benefits that we can give to our employees, which there isn't such a great incentive for people to do our kind of work that really need basic health care and benefits and things like that. So everything is really kind of stacked against us as a small independent retailer that's trying to connect people with, semi-perishable foods. So it's kind of like, where do you even start some days? But we our direction, and we really believe in our mission, and we think we do that pretty well. So and we're kind of looking forward to growing the entire market as we move forward, and we know we have a long way to go, but at least that gives us a direction. I see there's lots of issues with the industrialized food system and how it affects so many good products that can enrich rural areas, American made products and that kind of thing too. So
Yeah, it's excellent. And also, as you say, Matthew, trying to really educate people to maybe eat, smaller amounts, a specialty cheese, have one special cheese a week, and rather than lots of cheap cheese. Because one thing that we don't address, and maybe at some point this is a bigger conversation, but is true cost accounting, and what goes into how much we subsidize a very dysfunctional food system, where we should really be switching those resources around. So let's see, Dawn, why don't you go ahead and just give David a minute to catch up. I know you walked away. We're talking about the barriers and the ways in which the industrial food system drives a wedge into regional food systems, and disconnects us from our food source, and how you experience that. So Dawn, why don't you go ahead and we'll.
So my first thought is that, the larger industrialized food system, it steers us away from what we should be eating. Because I really believe that in that idea that you are what you eat, and that we as indigenous people of this land, that we should be eating the foods from our land. What is our, so for example, Narragansett any tribe is named, it's the name of we are the people from. So for Narragansett, we are the people from the small point of land. As these people, as the people of the small point of the land, we're part of that ecosystem. We're part of that environment. We need to be eating the foods from that land to keep ourselves healthy. So that's kind of one message that I am always trying to share. And I think it even goes beyond, you know, our culture and who we are as Indigenous people. I think it just goes just into who we are as people. And when we're eating food that is not even seasonally supposed to be around, you know, in the wrong time of years, I think it does affect it affects our health. So one big barrier that I see is the disconnect of our younger generations, because, you know, they're caught up in, you know, modern technology. You know, they're caught up with all these other food choices that are, you know, available. And so you'll see a lot of disconnect from that generation, knowing their basic plant knowledge and even appreciation of some of our traditional foods. And I guess, you know, as a grandmother, I'm a grandmother of 8, I take that role very seriously. And I also see that with each passing elder, that like my husband and I tell him, like, we're moving up in rank, and we don't want to be, but we are. And so it's become a responsibility for us to make sure that we share what we know. And so I use my role as a grandmother to influence my grandchildren, and I tell them what's good food, what's going to help you grow, what's going to make you strong, what's going to, you know, make your brain strong, and what's not, and what's not real food, but it's like food that's trying to trick you. So I use that role. But as a farmer, I feel like I also have an opportunity. And so for me, I grow heritage varieties of plants, usually plants that are more native, more indigenous crops. So things like tomatoes. I grew 45 different varieties of heirloom tomatoes this year. And I felt like it was really important to bring those to market, to share them. And when I'm selling them or when I'm sharing them, I'm like telling people what's good, what how to eat it, you know. And I feel like I give a lot. So I give a lot of samples so that people will experience it. And I feel like there's so many people that will come to our table and they're always oohing on over how beautiful and colorful, you know, our stand is. But I like when I can give them a tomato and get that reaction, you know. So I'm opening them up to experience something that they wouldn't normally experience, because they're so used to seeing that round red tomato that, you know, is being pushed as the tomato. And that tomato, that's this tomato you get all year round, right? That has no taste and no flavor. So anyway, I will stop there.
Just quickly, do you want to talk a little bit about the corn that you grow and share the story you shared with me about how people come around looking for corn, and if they don't find it, they
I mean, corn is, you know, a traditional staple. So for us, you know, we grew Narragansett flint corn last year. You know, our you know, another way that I can also kind of make a change in people's thinking, I guess, is through my farm stand on my farm. So people saw corn growing because our farm is right on the road, it's right on Main Street. And so, you know, they stop and they see corn and they're asking, when is this corn ready? And I had to tell them, I'm not growing this corn for money, you know, that's not our purpose. We're growing the corn because it's, you know, we're growing it because it's a traditional food. It's Narragansett flint corn. It's something that we grow for medicine, for tradition, for healing. It's not about, you know, the dollar all the time. That's not our motivation. And I don't know, when we grew the corn on our tribal farm, it was very significant for us because, you know, everybody can grow corn as individual families, you know, privately on their own land, but having an opportunity to grow corn on our land collectively as a group, as a tribe, to plant it together, to nurture it together, and then harvest it together and braid it. And, you know, so when you're harvesting, there's songs, there's food sharing, there's that whole camaraderie that comes with it. That ended up being probably one of the most significant times of my life, and I'm going to be 57 in 2 days. But having that opportunity to do that and to see that growing corn could be truly a medicine, and it was just, it's something I'll never forget, basically.
Thank you. David.
Sorry. Sorry, I had to run away there for a moment. That was
That's
an
okay.
emergency.
David's at his restaurant.
I told them they had one emergency, and that was it. So yeah, I can talk a lot about this. For us, I think sort of our specialty thing that we do here, and the thing that we're most connected to is local fishing community. And the industrialized food system is kind of really turned fishing into an industry that's dying, by and large, I think, especially when it comes to the small fishermen and this notion that we kind of imagine the fishermen getting in a boat in the morning, going out, catching fish, coming back with fish, selling the fish at like the market. That's kind of gone. And now it's to the point where fishermen have, boats that are worth several $million, and they're huge, and they go out for 2 to 3 weeks at a time, and they're catching fish that whole time. And by the time they get it back, like all you're really getting at the market is fish that is a week or so old, and has a very, very short shelf life. So people always say, fish only lasts 3 days. Well, that's why we throw a lot of fish in the garbage, because we're getting it and it's already bad, essentially. And so the amount of waste, just when you think about sustainability, and it's a limited resource, even though there's a lot of fish in the sea, it is certainly not infinite. And the amount of waste that system creates because somebody in Nebraska wants a perfectly shaped hockey puck of white fleshed fish that has no flavor, is insane. I mean, just the fact that we're throwing tons of fish in the garbage every day because they come in big nets, and there's only a market for the one species. There used to be, even in the last year, this has changed, where like bycatch is not sellable. So half of what they're catching is going back into the ocean as waste. They don't even bring it to the dock. So these are all the issues that are happening, and it's just pretty bad. Not that there's no hope. There's a lot of people trying to do the opposite. And so we really focus on is trying to work with the small fishermen and trying to find ways where this can work better. And we're making some headway, but the obstacles are many. The regulations are all kind of geared towards, there's a reason why people fish this way, because the market has been set and the system is in place, and this is how you can subsist. And the small fishermen that are trying to do it now are just kind of getting pushed out. There's not really a place for them. So a lot of the work that we're trying to do is connecting that directly to the consumer. For me as a chef, the nice thing is I can influence two sets of people. I can influence the people who come to the restaurant by showing them different things that they can eat and get them interested in locally produced products like kelp or different species of fish that are more sustainable, different ways to eat fish. We're a big problem in this country with no one wants the whole fish. Everybody just wants the fillet. Please don't have any bones in it, the whole thing. And that's the worst possible way to eat fish for the environment. And then I can influence the people who are catching the fish and selling the fish to me, because I can say, I want something more sustainable. I only want fish that's caught today, things like that. So trying to find that balance and influence both sides of the coin is something that we work a lot on.
And educating your customers along the way through taste,
Yep.
right, around the different species of fish that are usually overlooked, and bringing that forth and centering that on your menu. It's a big part of what you do as well as kelp. And there's huge, learning curve and education it's a big part of our economy here in Connecticut is the kelp.
Yep. And we're lucky having a bit of a higher end restaurant. People are coming here for an experience. And I think it's definitely not the same a couple of rungs down on the price scale, where people are just looking for food and they don't really care about the story. However, I think that we're able to influence the market, and maybe other restaurants will follow suit, or maybe the taste trends will kind of trickle down into less expensive restaurants and be something that can affect the broader market is our hope.
Right. And Matthew, that's something you talk about as well, is driving market. And yeah, and with that, it becomes more accessible and available and kind of part of our everyday. So I want to move on, and Natalie, I'm going to, engage you next. Because, Natalie has an excellent, among many things, an educator, but also a writer. And so through your writing, I very enjoy your newsletter, and I encourage everyone to sign on who is interested. It really is not only engaging, but it's funny and just wonderful. You have a really great sense of humor. And there is this, there is a call in your newsletter to connect and meet for coffee if you're in New York, and there is really an intention around building relationships. So my next question for all of you, and again we'll start with Natalie, is in what ways have relationships, building network building, served as a pathway to overcome these barriers and obstacles? I hope that's not too much of a nuanced question, but I feel like so often building networks and cultivating relationships really is the pathway to this act of resistance, if you will, and creating a better way.
Yeah, I think one of the best ways that I have kind of built relationships and networks to kind of address these obstacles and barriers is through my work at NAFSN, the North American Food Systems Network. There's so many bright young folks, especially kind of how Dawn was saying with her young grandchildren, that she's kind of instilling that knowledge with them now at a young age. There's so many young professionals who are coming out of college, coming out of maybe even grad school, who want to change the world in some capacity. They don't know what, but they want to go into food systems, or they want to go into sustainability. And they come to NAFSN as a way to kind of work through all that and to find community. And I think that's kind of the heart of it, is finding community and sharing your resources. I think sometimes in some of these spaces, there's a lot of gatekeeping of information and of resources and of, everyone wants the same pot of money sometimes, and the same pots of grants and things like that. And things are siloed and information is not told to certain folks. But I think if we're all in it together and we're all trying our best to kind of serve our communities, serve the greater good, and create places and pathways to overcome some of these barriers, I highly suggest coming to just things like this, like a webinar, where we're all talking about how we're doing our part to try to overcome these things. I think being in community with people who are like-minded is very, very important. And again, to share your resources, to connect folks who might not even live in the same state. Like that's what, like in my newsletter, I'm like, if you're coming to town, New York is a tourism capital, come in and send me a ping through email or anything like that, so we can kind of communicate and talk and get to know each other. And I think that's kind of the heart of it, really, is that connection of either on Zoom or in person over coffee, is making those connections and making those pathways that we can kind of come together and share in what we know and in our knowledge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And also I think that more and more from the philanthropic sector, the dynamic between the nonprofit and philanthropic sector is beginning to be disrupted, right? Yeah. In that I think more and more funders want to see collaboration. They want to see partnership. They want to see people amplifying one another, which is very critical. David.
I'm sorry, I was waving.
Oh, I thought you were. Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's, exciting and, still emergent, but I think very, very important. Anyone else? I'll just leave it up to anyone. This is a kind of a broader question. Relationships, network building, network weaving. How are you cultivating that?
Well, for us in the restaurant, I think for we kind of have these core values that we want to support sustainability, we want to support community. And, when you're ordering, you can get some of these products through big companies, but when you're ordering it from the person who's going out and getting it, and you kind of have this, first of all, you become friends, but those relationships that you build, there's kind of an obligation there now that you're supporting each other. And you can kind of build this networky web of everyone kind of supporting what the other person is doing. And, the people that I buy products from also support the restaurant, and they send people here and they come in, and it becomes very communal, and it makes it a lot more difficult to sever that. You're in it at that point. And it's like, of course I'm going to buy fish from Josiah because Josiah brings me fish. Like, that's what I do. And I'm going to work it out. And that's a relationship now that I've committed to. Whereas it's really easy when you're buying something from a company like Cisco to say, you know what, I'm going to switch to US Foods. And because it's nameless and it doesn't matter. And you're probably getting the same product anyway. But when you really connect it to a person, and, we always say here, it's such a small town, that we go to each other's houses and our kids know each other and they're around the fire together at night. And like, a lot of times that's where the ideas come up, and kind of we hatch the schemes of, the next thing that we're trying to do. That's how I found one of my great fishermen. I was hanging out with my really good friend who's a kelp farmer, and I was just talking about this thing I wanted to do with fish and how can I get this? And he's like, oh, I know a guy. And I think that's how these things can grow, but it starts with the relationships, those personal relationships with people in the system.
So on that note, do you want to talk about Stonington Fresh? Do you want to talk about?
Yeah, I do. That's some initiative that started pretty recently down at the commercial fishing docks, where, there's a bunch of fishermen down there, and they're trying to get more of the fish that comes in to be used locally. So right now, the way that the system works is the vast majority of fish, and as I was saying before, the way the market is set is they're fishing not for us here in Stonington, Connecticut. They're fishing for the Las Vegas market and the New York City market and the Chicago market. And most of the fish comes in, gets dumped in a big bin, and is shipped out to those markets and frozen and processed. One of my fishermen loves to tell the story of you can go to the store and buy frozen squid that says Point Judith, Rhode Island, but that squid is caught in Point Judith, Rhode Island, and then shipped to China, processed, frozen again, and shipped back and sold here. And it's just this insane loop where you can hardly get squid. Even just, I could almost see Point Judith from here, and I could sometimes not get the squid, but it's going through that crazy cycle. And so Stonington Fresh is something that started down at the docks, just trying to get local restaurants really to commit to buying food from the docks. And I took the opportunity there to try to get them to fish a little bit of a different way. And so we're trying to meet in the middle. As I said before, there's so many challenges for the commercial fishing industry. The regulations are crazy, and everything's just kind of a mess, but we're trying to find a way to keep it going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just to expand a little bit on your point about once you're in relationship with someone, it changes things, even if you might not agree or necessarily see things, right? And this, I think, holds true in so many ways, not just the food system, but there's a certain connection that you want to work with people, and you influence one another, and change happens that way, right? In those little fractal moments of connection. Dawn, did you want to? I think you're muted. Whoop, still muted. There you go.
I have a split screen, so it was gone. So thinking about ways that we overcame barriers, and I'm trying to think of what your question was now, but with us, yeah, we started the Narragansett Food Sovereignty Initiative, and that was very helpful because we did it initially on the tribe's land, so it gave us a space and the ability to develop virtually an outside, not virtually, but an outside classroom. So we did all kinds of programming, and it was something, honestly, that hadn't been happening. So for my husband, he started that actually, side note, because he was looking for a space to build community. So that was an interesting side note for that. But once we started, we had, like I said, more groups come, more opportunities for classes and programs, and that connection, that kind of connection intergenerationally too, because we had a lot of elders and a lot of youth participating. It just kept growing. And so, and again, no pun intended, but it was very rewarding to see. But we have since moved that initiative from the tribe's farm to now we have it right here on our own farm. And one of the takeaways, we do a lot of work with other, agencies. And I mean, I feel like I have an opportunity where I'm on the town's, I'm on the town's conservation commission. That's a big thing, because that's a space that I would not normally have kind of gotten into. I feel like the more that we work, the more we're looking for more ways that we can work to share our perspective, because the only way you can really make a change is to get involved. So it was a civic thing that I looked at, and my husband is on like a lot of national boards and stuff too. So he's been able to actually change policy on the national level. So I think that we've found interesting ways that we can help, not just the indigenous population, but to help on all levels. And I think that's very helpful. And then just one thing I also want to add is that one takeaway from our work is that we realized that we needed to combine our two organizations, the Northeast Indigenous Arts Alliance and Narragansett Food Sovereignty Initiative. And we're going to merge those initiatives and form one organization, and that will be the Northeast Indigenous Ag and Arts. So it's something that's kind of just come naturally from what we're doing and how the work intersects.
Yeah, and I think, again, just going back to this, industrial food system, which does everything to divide, everything to fracture, right? The onset, it's really the colonialism at its best, right? It's oppression as it's at its best. It's how can we create systems that go in and divide and really break things down? And it's in us, it's innate in us to come together, right? And to really, reweave, and it's really, it's a process of, in that is healing.
Yes.
And so, what comes to mind is what we're seeing, starting to see emerge, and Natalie, you can, certainly speak to this, is more and more food policy councils, right? And so this idea of, building alliances, building councils, building networks, initiatives, as ways to as containers for these conversations to be had, so then they can feed into the bigger systems, the bigger policy that, whether it's federal, state, regional, what have you, but how critical it is for us to be organized in our communities. So, we can have influence and impact. It's really, really important. So, Matthew, I want to engage you for a minute here, because you represent so many, artisanal cheesemakers around the world, and some have been in existence for centuries, if you think of European cheesemakers. And so much, Sarah and I wanted you to be represented, or wanted the Fairfield Cheese Shop to be represented, because there is a seasonality to cheese, and we my next question touches on seasonality, so we can save that piece. But so much of these cheeses reflect place in such a profound way, and the relationships there among the producers. And I know Laura and Chris take trips into Europe, so people can begin to to learn and really understand who these people are, and what a special craft it is. So do you want to touch on that a little bit, and then, as I said, we can go into more of the seasonality aspect. And
Yeah. Good. Yeah, absolutely. So cheese is 100% tied to seasonality, and again, kind of in a lot of different ways. There is the same the milk composition changes throughout the year, so depending on lactation cycles and what the animals are eating specifically, and then those flavors get further concentrated as the cheese is cured. So cheeses, depending on how long the cheese is aged for, it kind of captures a snapshot of seasonality. When you look for like the really beginning, goat's milk cheeses in the ones from the very first early spring when they're out there, eating all kinds of wild onions and flowers and herbs and things like that. And then within a few weeks that you get those cheeses and you can taste it, and you can actually taste, the mint and the onion and all that coming through into the milk. And which hints on a lot of really interesting ideas that, your food is, farmers are farming cheese farmers anyway, farm for microbes, and it's for farming for deliciousness, which actually starts out in the fields, in the grasses and the cereals and the herbs and the wildflowers and that. And when the animals have enough space to really graze and to really take advantage of the wild flora that's around, that's when we have the absolute height of quality of cheeses. And some of those are great examples of some of the European greats like Gruyere, and where there's a whole segment of Gruyere production that broke off from traditional Gruyere production. It's called Letivas, of the summer. Which is such a beautiful idea. And they're like the strictest, most seasonal raw milk small batch production in the world, and they're grazing on some of the most pristine pastures on the planet too. Up especially there, there's a segment of cheeses called alpage cheeses, which are only grazed, over like 3,000 feet above sea level, which when you get that high, the different vegetation just explodes in diversity. And all of that contributes to some of the most absolute delicious milk you would ever imagine. And changing that into a cheese, and transforming that is, again, you're taking grasses and herbs and transforming it into gold. It's a really amazing process, and it's a living food, and it's such an enriching one when it's really done in the most natural way. And when we can, really get to enjoy it on that level is kind of the pinnacle. There's like nothing better than that. And, industrialized food, of course, tells us to eat the same food all year round, and it should taste exactly the same and look the same. And which I think is so counterintuitive to how you should be living. You should have that variety and diversity that really good cheese production really promotes. Yeah, and we get to make those choices as a retailer of who we work with. And people are used to getting fresh cheese in December and January, which I don't know if you know about dairy farming, but there's not too many animals that are giving you really good fresh milk in December and January. So it's like, where does that milk come from? And they're transporting it, they're freezing it, and all of that has really major implications as a product. And people unknowingly end up keep buying it, even though we're going really counter to seasonality and to what it should be. So industrialized food really tells you that it's always possible to get all things. Which is just a myth, and you're buying cheeses that I would definitely recommend eating more seasonally to ensure better quality of what you're eating throughout the year. But there's lots of ways that seasonality is really captured very well through cheeses and cheese production. So and we love telling those stories. That's what, as a retailer, we get the fun part of being able to really shape the market and shape what's available to our consumers, and have a say, an active role in that process. And like I said, it's an amazing experience to be able to share with our consumers. So.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so interesting. Okay, so fresh cheese. Okay, so yeah, to flesh that out a little bit more, because I just learned something. So it's better to have fresh cheese in the warmer months and have more of the dried and maybe semi
Yes.
soft in the
Essentially, there are, some milks, some milks can be frozen, but when you end up creating a product that ends up fermenting and breaking down, that all comes to light. If you have a product that's been frozen, you're gonna mess with its composition to the point that you won't be able to hide that when you try to make an artisanal good. Which is kind of the gritty underbelly of some of the American cheese production and the worldwide cheese production too, of how they can have these cheeses that are always available, even though they really shouldn't be. And if you really know what you're looking for, you can kind of pick up on what cheeses were made from milk that has been probably, stored too long or frozen or manipulated in that way that is, beyond some kind of our natural way of using it. And what small production facility can afford to not be pushing their animals to produce milk even in seasons when they shouldn't be, and having products all the time, even though seasonally you maybe shouldn't have that product for a month or two. And you have these hard conversations with people because they want what the American consumer, the average American consumer, I feel like has gotten used to having what they want all the time, regardless of what actually made to get it there in the first place. Which is that we're trying to talk to people and trying to keep people open to trying new things, because your absolute favorite thing might not be what's available right now. It might not even be what's really good. You might hate hard cheese, and I might have an amazing hard cheese that's so good right now, and you should just be open and try it and go along with it and get the variety, and trust a professional retailer that is going to steer you in the right direction. So and we give them a place. Again, it's about that active role of the retailer, where we are not just reacting to the market, but actually being ahead of it and deciding what good quality means and how people should be consuming those products.
Thank you for that. Natalie, I want to bring you in a little bit here, because I recognize that you work with people who seasonality is probably the last thing on their mind, and it's really about getting food on their plate, and having access to not only fresh produce, but the likes of a specialty cheese at Greenwich Cheese Shop or is just not in their purview. So I talk a little bit about that and what those barriers are, not only for you, as an educator, but also for the community you work with. And
Sure. I think one of the things that I try my best to do as a culinary educator instructor is to kind of advocate and advocate as easily as possible, in the sense of, like, I'm not telling you what to do. I'm not telling you what to eat. I'm giving you suggestions. I'm coming here to give you knowledge that you can, if you take it, it's going to be really good for you, because obviously eating in season is obviously healthier than eating things that are, coming from 3,000 miles away and are shipped here and have no nutritional value by the time they get to your plate. Things are just nutritious when they are in season. And so I try to explain that as much as possible in my cooking classes. One of the things I also advocate for is for folks to use their, in New York City, we have a program, and I'm not sure if this program is also in Connecticut, but if you have SNAP, you can use SNAP at farmers markets. And I think this is I'm pretty sure it's in the 50 states, but you can use SNAP at different green markets and farmers markets. And, you could even get extra SNAP dollars just by coming to like a cooking demo that they might have at the farmers market. So they might have something in season, they'll do a little cooking demo, you get a couple extra bucks, and you can use that money at the farmer's market. And so I always try to give people as much information, because again, it's just resources, right? So like, information is knowledge that you can pass down. It's also resources. And so I try my hardest to, if I can go and I have a couple hours or free, I'm like, oh, the farmer's market's open today. It's a couple blocks away. Let's go and do that together as a group. Like, I try to create pathways that folks can feel comfortable. They don't feel like they're judged. They don't feel like they are, being told what to do. Instead, they're just being informed of the options that are out there for them. And I've had a lot of participants tell me that, you know, they didn't know that they can use SNAP, and that they didn't know that the fruit tastes so much different when it's coming locally from the farmer than when it sits, you know, an apple that's super waxy, that's been waxed and sitting for months in the supermarket, as opposed to just coming from, you know, the actual farmer, and it's not waxy, it's a little different looking. You know, the carrots aren't all the same. Some fruits and vegetables all look different. There's no uniformity. It kind of opens folks' eyes to the greater world outside of maybe their corner store, because that's all they can get, or the supermarket, that's the only supermarket that's in their neighborhood. So I try my hardest to give whatever information I can to kind of get folks into that rhythm of seasonality. For myself personally, I try not to eat outside of the season. Obviously, there's times when I want to, and I do. I'm not strict with myself, but I try to practice what I preach. I don't eat fruit that is out of season. It doesn't taste like much for me, so it's not like I'm enjoying it. People who I see eating like watermelon in December make no sense to me. And they have it like in those tubs that are already pre-cut and stuff like that. But yeah, I try to practice what I preach, and when I do preach, so to speak, I try to come from an empathetic way, because so many of these people have already been told what to do. They've just been pushed through the system, and at that point, people start getting like a little chip on their shoulders and like, oh, one more thing to be told to do. So I again just try to come at it from a place of hope and inspiration, and to get people to eat better food that is that is relatively accessible to them.
You know, taste, right, is usually the is what really guides people. Is it just tastes better, just makes more sense in so many ways. Matthew or Dawn, do you want to talk a little bit about, I didn't really formally ask the question, but you know, what does seasonality mean to you, and how do you integrate it into your work? And obviously, Dawn, you're a farmer, but
yeah, so obviously seasons are very important. I feel like everything I do is based on seasons, whether it's the farming side or programming, educational program. I set up all my stuff by seasons. But you know, in the Northeast, you know, culturally, we have the 13 moons. So all of those moons are representative of the, you know, what's being harvested at the time. You know, whether if it's the maple sugar season, or, you know, or if it's the strawberry moon. But so I think that for us, we are always aware, and we give thanks for the gifts, and we consider them blessings. And so it's just part of that, working in harmony and balance, you know. I feel like it's a mindset, is that, you know, you don't take more than you need. And if you are taking something, you offer a prayer. So, you know, in the winter months, we're hunting. So venison is, you know, very much on our menu, you know, on our dinner plates. But we don't take that, we wouldn't take that deer without, you know, thanking it for giving its life so that we can live. So that's that balance. And I think I just feel like that's kind of lost in the kind of larger society, and how where food comes from, and how food is acquired. I think you know, so I guess again, this is just another opportunity to share that. So my husband says, you know, if you think about it, you know, like Mother Earth can give a lot, but she's not gonna let us humans keep taking without maintaining that balance. And so as a mother, you know, and how mothers do, they teach lessons, and just that's kind of what we take climate change as, lessons. But the question is, are we listening? You know, so these lessons are being thrown at us, and so we need to take the time to listen to it and do things differently.
Yeah. Thank you. David, did you have thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, seasonality for a chef in a restaurant that's focused on this kind of thing is very important. But I think, it's interesting, what Matthew was saying about people who don't understand that they can't get the thing that they want whenever they want it. That's certainly something that we kind of butt our heads up against. And I think, with fish, it's not so much seasonality as much as, it's kind of the same fish, more or less available most of the year. But I remember one time last year, there was a nor'easter that blew through, because nor'easters blow through New England on a regular basis. And no one is fishing in a nor'easter. And so it was 2 days after the storm blown through, and boats were just starting to go back out. It was a weekend, and obviously nobody had the kind of fish that we normally use. So we didn't have any fish on the menu, which is weird for a restaurant that does a lot of seafood. And I thought it was a great opportunity for servers to have that conversation. We were like, why don't you have any fish? And I think the real question is, why does anybody have any fish in town? And so it's like, you should really be questioning where they got the fish across the street. We don't have any because no one's fishing. And just trying to get it into people's heads that there's, when you go to a restaurant or a store and you buy something and eat it, somebody went out and got that, or made it, or grew it. And there's a process and all these factors involved in how that can come to be. And seasonality is a huge one. You can't grow tomatoes in January in New England. You just can't. No one can do it. And so I think that leads to a lot of things. If you can, I think it's pretty easy to explain why to eat seasonally. And I think it can lead to so many other things. If you're eating seasonally, you're also eating locally. If you're eating locally, you're probably supporting small producers in your community. And so it's just a great touchstone to get into the other things that we all want to kind of promote. So it's very important to us.
Yeah, and it also produces a longing, right? It's not that instant gratification that I think we've all come so, so used to we become so used to instant gratification, but the longing is so critical. It's who, and I long for tomatoes. I too don't really eat out of season. And so when tomatoes are around, it's all I eat. And then I'm ready to say goodbye to tomatoes in the end of September. And I long for them again in next July. And that brings us into our own cycle, and it goes back to that connection. So, and fish also obviously do have a season as well, which again we're not as in touch with, but certain fish come through. And I want to open it up to questions from our audience here. And so please, as you're thinking of questions for any of our panelists, please put them in the chat. And in the meantime, I'm going to combine 3 questions into one, and either, feel free to just answer one, or, integrate them, but they're all somewhat connected here. So the first is, what compels you to use food as a catalyst for healing and change? So why food? And with that, what is your vision for a food system that is just and truly nourishing? So they're kind of connected. So why food as a catalyst for healing and change? And where do you see the and what is your vision? And so, so often, we really focus on the problem, and rightfully so. Our food system is, we've all touched on, is very unjust and very destructive and exploited. It is rooted in exploitation, going back to colonization of the indigenous people and slavery. So it's heavy and it's deep, and it continues to thrive today. So that is all very, very critical. But so often we forget about the bigger vision. And so I'd like just to engage all of you on what that is for you. And then we'll wrap up with a question from one of our viewers, and feel free, anyone can hop in. Anyone?
I guess when you're talking about like why we use food, I guess it's pretty simple. I mean, I'm a chef. What else would I use? But I think the real question is, why do we do anything? My mother always like, why can't you just make regular food? It'd be so much easier. You're going through all this trouble. It's so hard, so much work. And I think it just comes down to like wanting to use the skills that I have to make things better. And so food is the vehicle because that's the vehicle I know how to drive, essentially. And so that's what I can do. That's what I can give back to anything, is to find a way to use food to make something better. And I forgot what I was going to say, but I think that's what's that?
Your vision for.
Oh yeah, I mean, I don't really think of it. I think very rarely about the obstacles and about how bad the food system is. Certainly it's bad and there's all these issues, but mostly what I think about is all the producers that are out there doing it really, really well. And there's so many people doing amazing work. I mean, like the farming that Don's talking about, there's so many people doing that. And instead of focusing for me on this huge, insurmountable, evil food system, it's much easier to focus on supporting what's right in your backyard. Almost every community, certainly in the type of communities that we live in, it's more rural, there's farmers you can support and there's ways to push things forward in the right way. And I think that's, for me, it's like more like you're just chipping away at it. I don't have a grand plan for the food system. It's a little out above my pay grade. I just focus on trying to do the little things on a daily basis as a consumer and in my profession.
Great.
Yeah, so kind of piggyback off that, I mean, that's kind of with us. For cheese is just a supremely satisfying, I liked it early on, and there was just something, even I want people to buy better quality cheese. Even when you have cheese that's maybe not the greatest quality, there's still that like creamy, salty, it's a food that sticks with you, and for always, like it's a food that just makes you feel better when you do eat it, and the better the quality, maybe the better that you feel, or the more you know about it, you can be informed about it too. But and I think that's just such a, in an instant, whatever your day was, if you have a really nice, good quality piece of cheese at the end of it, you might feel just a little bit better about whatever you're doing. Is just, that's what impels me to keep pushing the good word of food and cheese to people, that, that's one of the few things that you can control in this world, hopefully to some extent, that, can make your life just a little bit better on a really small, meaningful scale. So, but
Natalie or Dawn, any thoughts?
I think my vision for a food system that is just and truly nourishes would be one that there's no waste, and that there's food on every table. I think at the end of the day, there's so much food waste, and so much of that food that is wasted is pretty fine food, right? And a lot of that is also like how we were talking about in the industrial food systems. Even our local farmers, unfortunately, have high waste turnovers. I mean, I think there should be programs that we encourage folks to glean, and to lean into gleaning, and to get rid of so much waste that can be landing on people's plates. And I think my vision would be, hopefully, and in my lifetime, seeing less waste and seeing more food on actual tables would be a truly perfect one.
Yeah, food is a human right. Yeah. Dawn?
Yeah, I'm kind of lost. I agree with what everyone said, and I think I lost what I was going to say though. But I think food is absolutely a catalyst for healing and change. I think it's almost like that whole education piece again is to get people to maybe not always be looking for the fancy foods. Nothing against the fancy food, nothing against, my husband would always say everything doesn't have to have a sauce. Knowing what things taste like fresh and raw out of the garden, and I was just sitting here and I kind of went into a zone because growing up, we didn't have everything. And so we ate what we could afford. And usually what you can afford isn't the best food for you. And so learning or relearning what is good for you. And my mom, she's a single parent. We had a garden. I learned gardening very early, but I hated Brussels sprouts. I love Brussels sprouts now, but I hated Brussels sprouts then. And she loved to cook. So she taught me how to cook. But I realized that, I still love mac and cheese. I still love things that I probably shouldn't be eating a lot of. So I think it's, again, finding that balance and finding a way to know more about what plants are good. I grew up, again, with my mother having very good plant knowledge. We knew what plants that we could harvest at different times of the year. So that was part of our diet. My father-in-law was also very much into medicinal plants, and so was my husband. So that is part of our life, so we know what to make a tea, what to use for tea, what to use for things. Not everyone knows that. I say, try to learn all you can and use what you can naturally and holistically, because that is really that is that catalyst for healing and change.
Yeah.
Literally is to look to your landscape, because you'll find what you need. It's right there.
Yeah. And, and this touches on a little bit on this upcoming question here from Chloe Bennett. Thank you, Chloe. But we have got to preserve our land and protect our waterways. We have got to do that. Those wild landscapes where those herbs are, and the fresh waters, and land access is just absolutely critical. And, I like to think that more and more with some grant funding that there will be more resources for urban farms, community gardens, where people can grow their own food. It's just absolutely critical. And so on that note, I just want to ask Chloe's question here for anyone who wants to answer it, which is a very important one. She says, it's been wonderful hearing from everyone speak on food security from their respective backgrounds. A question for anyone, but how do you think we can make quality foods more affordable? Specifically from a food justice perspective for people even in food deserts. Again, that goes into cultivating more community gardens, more community urban farms, gleaning. Natalie, Matthew, Dawn, any thoughts on affordability?
I would just say two things. It definitely has to do with supply chain. I think why we have inflation and why all these things are so expensive now because of supply chain. But also, I think it also starts with voting. So knowing who your councilmen are and your assembly members, and voting during midterm elections, and knowing what their interests are in your local community, they have hyper local influence on your regional food systems. Find out where their interests lie. If their interests lie with developers who are taking over plots of land and green spaces that can be used for urban farming or for local green gardens, and instead of turning them into developments. Find out who your folks are, who are on the ground and who are to be advocating for you. And I think that's how we can start, is talking to these people who are our governing bodies and who make choices for our communities and our neighborhoods and our cities, and going and finding out who these folks are and voting. And I think that's how we can start that conversation of finding more affordable ways for folks to actually have affordable food that's accessible.
Yeah, which goes back to our food policy councils and yeah. Anyone else? We touched about, you know, markets and increasing demand.
I feel like I need to add that from a farming perspective, I think as a farmer, you do have a choice where your food goes. And so you also have that choice of ensuring that there's a healthy food option and it's accessible to those who need it. So I would advocate that, you know, if you find yourself in that position where you need food, you know, get to know your farmer, stop by. I have an honor system stand and a lot of people do stop and talk to me, but I would never refuse food to anyone.
Mm,
So yeah, get to know your farmer.
yeah. Any other questions, comments? We're approaching 8:30. This has been such a wonderful conversation. Thank you all so much. And thank you all for being here. Any other final questions or comments? Any closing remarks? No? Okay. Well, thank you again. And our next event is in October. Stay tuned for that. And please support, you know, in your own way, all, you know, our panelists, Natalie, David, Matthew, Dawn, just doing really incredible work. Follow them on Instagram, sign up for newsletters, take a cheese course, dine at David's restaurant. So thank you. Good night.